She looked at me from the witness stand with the same eyes she had when she was 5 years old and asked me to check for monsters under her bed. Only this time, I was the monster she was pointing at. Her voice didn't shake. That was the part I couldn't get past. My daughter Emma, my only child, the girl I'd taught to tie her shoes and braid her hair and stand up to bullies, sat 15 feet away from me in that cold courtroom and said, without a tremor, that I was a danger to her son, to my grandson, to the little boy I'd been raising while she disappeared for months at a time. I want you to hold on to that word, disappeared, because it will matter later, in a way that still makes my hands cold. I raised Emma alone. Her father, James, decided when she was 3 that parenthood wasn't for him. He packed a duffel bag on a Wednesday morning and kissed her forehead while she slept, and then he was gone. No custody battle, no weekend visits, just 17 years of silence and a birthday card that showed up every 2 years if he remembered. I worked 2 jobs, receptionist at a dental office during the day, bookkeeping for a hardware store at night. I missed school plays. I cried in parking lots. But Emma never went hungry, never went unloved. And I told myself that was enough. By the time she was 16, she'd started pulling away. Normal teenage stuff, I thought. She found a group of friends I didn't trust. She stopped telling me where she was going. At 17, she was pregnant. At 18, she was a mother. And I was the one who stepped in. Not because I wanted to take over, because she asked me to. She looked at me from a hospital bed, 18 years old and terrified, with a newborn named Leo in her arms, and she said, "Mom, I can't do this. Please." So I did. I took a leave from work. I moved her back into my house. I got up for every night feeding while Emma slept. I paid for diapers and formula and the pediatrician visits. And when Emma started going out again, first for an hour, then for an evening, then for days at a time, I was the one who stayed. I was the one Leo called Mama first, because I was the one who was there. The audience at home, if you have ever been the one who stayed, the one who showed up while someone else took the credit, took the love, took the name, then you already know where this story is headed. You are not watching this alone. Fire emoji in the comments if you've ever been the one who held it all together while someone else did the breaking. By the time Leo was 3, Emma was gone more than she was home. She'd show up for a few weeks, play the doting mother for Instagram, and then vanish again. No call, no money, no explanation. And I kept Leo. I enrolled him in preschool. I taught him his letters. I rocked him through ear infections and night terrors and the kind of crying that comes from a child who doesn't understand why his mother keeps leaving. And I never said a word against Emma. Not one. Because I remembered what it was like to be 18 and drowning, and I kept believing she'd find her way back. She found her way back, all right. She found it with a lawyer and a petition for guardianship and a story so carefully constructed that by the time I heard it spoken aloud in open court, I barely recognized myself. The petition was Emma's. She was suing me for custody of Leo, and she wasn't just asking the court to give her son back. She was asking them to rule that I was an unfit guardian, that I had alienated her from her own child, that my home was emotionally unsafe, that I was controlling, manipulative, toxic. She used words I'd taught her to read. She used the language of therapy I'd paid for. She stood in a courtroom I'd driven her to. I'd dropped her off at the courthouse that morning because her car wouldn't start, and she told a judge that I had spent years undermining her confidence as a mother so that I could keep Leo for myself. I sat at that table with my attorney, a woman named Celeste who I'd hired by cashing out half my retirement savings, and I listened to my daughter describe me as a woman who had never wanted anything except control. She didn't mention the night feedings. She didn't mention the rent I'd paid, the clothes I'd bought, the mornings I'd spent coaxing Leo to eat his oatmeal. She didn't mention that she'd been gone for 8 months straight before this hearing, and that Leo had stopped asking where she was. She just looked at me with her father's eyes, James's eyes, cool and distant, and she told the judge I was the problem. And the judge believed her. But what Emma didn't know yet, what nobody in that courtroom knew, was that I hadn't come empty-handed. Because the month before she filed her petition, I had found something that would make every word she'd just spoken collapse under its own weight. And I was about to use it. The thing about being the reasonable one, the one who keeps the schedule, who packs the lunch, who shows up at every parent-teacher conference, is that people assume you'll be reasonable forever. They assume you'll take it. They assume you'll understand. And the court system? The court system is built for people who know how to perform, not people who know how to stay. After Emma's testimony, I sat in that hallway outside the courtroom for 45 minutes while Celeste talked strategy with a colleague. The bench was hard wood, the kind they put in government buildings so you remember your discomfort is public property. I watched people walk past, lawyers with rolling briefcases, a couple holding hands, a woman crying into a phone. And I kept thinking about the day Emma learned to ride a bike. She was 7. She fell 6 times. The 6th time, she scraped her knee so badly there was blood running down her shin. And she looked up at me with this furious little face and said, "I'm not getting back on." And I knelt down in the middle of the sidewalk and said, "You don't have to right now, but I'll be here when you're ready." That was the mother I was, the one who waited. The mother she described in that courtroom was someone else entirely. A woman who sabotaged, a woman who isolated, a woman who, according to Emma's attorney, a man named Bradley with a sharp suit and a sharper smirk, had systematically erased Emma's role in Leo's life. He used the word erased, as if I had taken a child's memory and scrubbed his mother out of it. As if I hadn't spent every single day for 3 years pointing to Emma's picture on the refrigerator and saying, "That's your mama, Leo. She loves you. She's coming back soon." I want you to hear what I'm about to tell you carefully, because this is the part where the story shifts, and not in the way I expected it to, not in the way any of us expected. The thing I'd found, the thing that was going to change everything, wasn't something I'd gone looking for. It had landed in my lap 3 weeks before the hearing, on a Thursday afternoon, while I was folding laundry and Leo was napping. Emma had been gone for 4 months by then. She'd left in February, kissed Leo on the forehead while I was in the bathroom, said she'd be back in an hour, and then didn't come home for 3 days. When she finally called, she was in Nevada. She'd met someone, a man named Derek. She said his name like it was a gift she was giving me. "His name is Derek, Mom. He's amazing. He has his own business." I didn't ask what kind of business. I didn't have the energy. I just said, "When are you coming home?" And she said she wasn't sure. She said she needed time to figure things out. She said Leo was better off with me anyway. I wrote that down. Better off with me anyway. I wrote it down in a spiral notebook I kept in the kitchen drawer, along with the date and time. Not because I was planning for a court case, because I was scared. Because I'd watched a documentary about a grandmother who raised her grandson for 6 years and then lost him overnight when the mother showed up with a new boyfriend and a court order. I wrote everything down. Every time Emma called, every time she visited, every time she promised to send money and didn't, every time Leo asked for her and I had to make up an answer. That spiral notebook, that sad, stained spiral notebook with coffee rings on the cover and a torn-off corner where Leo had gotten hold of it, was going to become the most important document in my entire life. But I didn't know that yet. I didn't know a lot of things yet. The Thursday it arrived, I was folding one of Leo's little shirts, a green one with a dinosaur on it, the one he insisted on wearing 3 days a week. when I heard the mail slot clatter. Bills, mostly. A grocery flyer. And a letter from the Nevada Department of Family Services, addressed to me. Not to Emma, to me. My hands went cold before I even opened it. You know that feeling. The one where your body knows something your brain hasn't caught up to yet. I opened it standing up, right there in the kitchen, with Leo's dinosaur shirt still in my left hand. It was a notice of investigation. An investigation into Emma. Into allegations of child neglect. Not of Leo, of another child. A child I didn't know about. A child named Mateo. A child who, according to the letter, was Emma's son, born 11 months ago, placed into emergency foster care in Clark County, Nevada, after neighbors reported a baby left alone in an apartment for what the letter described as an extended period. Emma had another child. She'd had a baby in Nevada and she'd never told me. And that baby, my grandson, Leo's half-brother, was in foster care because someone had left him alone. The letter had been sent to me because Emma listed me as her next of kin on an intake form, and then disappeared. The caseworker, a woman named Yvonne who would later become one of the most important people in this story, had tracked me down through public records. She was looking for Emma. She was looking for answers. And I was standing in my kitchen holding a dinosaur shirt and a letter that proved my daughter was not who she said she was. Not even close. I called Celeste the next morning, and she listened. And then she said 4 words that I will never forget. We can use this. Around here, we don't just survive it, we understand it. And what I was about to understand, what the next few weeks would teach me, is that the truth doesn't always set you free the way you think it will. Sometimes it just gives you a different kind of cage. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because the investigation into Emma was only part of what I'd found. There was something else, something worse, something that made Mateo's caseworker, Yvonne, go silent on the phone for a full 15 seconds when I told her. And I'm going to tell you exactly what it was. Celeste sat across from me in her office the next morning, a cup of cold coffee in front of her that she hadn't touched since I walked in. She'd read the letter from Nevada 3 times. The first time with her eyebrows raised, the second time with a highlighter in her hand, the third time with the kind of silence that means a lawyer is rearranging the entire strategy in her head. They're opening a termination of parental rights case, she said finally, for Mateo. The neglect finding is severe enough that Clark County is moving to sever. Emma will lose him permanently. She set the highlighter down. That means your daughter has a documented history of abandonment, in another state, with a child she never told anyone about, and she's asking a court to hand her Leo. I nodded, but I wasn't really there. I was still in my kitchen, holding that dinosaur shirt, trying to picture a baby I'd never met. Mateo, my grandson, 11 months old and already in the system, already alone. I kept thinking about his face, a face I couldn't picture because I didn't even know he existed. What does it do to a child to be that erased? Celeste was already moving. We file an emergency supplement to the court this week. We attach the Nevada letter. We show the judge a pattern. Emma didn't just leave Leo with a stable grandmother. She left another child in an empty apartment. That is not a mother seeking reunification. That is a woman who abandons her children when they become inconvenient. And for a moment, just a moment, I let myself feel hope. Real hope. The kind I hadn't felt since Emma's attorney stood up and called me a danger to my own grandson. But I want you to hear what happened next very carefully, because this is the part where the story bends. This is where what I thought was my victory turned out to be only the first layer of something much darker. Yvonne called me that evening, the caseworker from Nevada. Her voice was tired, in the way that social workers' voices get. Not defeated, just heavy. She'd been doing this work for 19 years, she told me later. and she'd learned to recognize when a case had more underneath it than what was on the forms. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Something that didn't make it into the official report. I didn't include it because it's hearsay, and I can't corroborate it yet. But I think you need to know." I sat down on the edge of my bed. Leo was in the next room, asleep with his dinosaur shirt clutched in one hand like a security blanket. The house was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. "Tell me," I said. Yvonne took a breath. "When we interviewed Emma after we found Mateo, she was erratic. She kept saying things that didn't make sense. She said Mateo wasn't supposed to be alone. She said someone was supposed to come. She blamed a babysitter we couldn't find. And then she started talking about you." My stomach dropped. "What about me?" "She said you had a house. A big house," she said. She told the intake officer that it was supposed to be hers, that it was always supposed to be hers. She said her mother, that's you, had stolen it from her." Yvonne paused. She said it twice, once in the interview, and once, according to a neighbor, in the parking lot afterward. The neighbor heard her on the phone, yelling at someone, a man, saying, "The house is mine. I just need the kid to get it." I didn't speak. I couldn't. The words sat in my chest like stones. "The neighbor thought she meant Mateo," Yvonne continued. "But she'd already left Mateo. She'd already abandoned him. So the child she was talking about, the child she needed to get the house." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The house. My house. The house I'd bought with my own savings after James left. The house where I'd raised Emma. The house where Leo had his own room with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling and a mural of a rocket ship I'd painted myself during the 3 weeks Emma was in Nevada the first time. The house Emma had never paid $1 toward. The house she had walked away from again and again like it was nothing. And now I understood something I hadn't understood before. The custody petition wasn't about Leo. Not really. Leo was the key to the lock. The lock was my house. If Emma got custody of Leo, and I was declared unfit, she could argue that Leo's stability required remaining in the home he knew, and she, as his legal guardian, would be the one to stay there. I would be removed. She would take my grandson and my home in one single court order. The whole thing had been a property play from the start. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I didn't know it yet. Not fully, not in the way I would come to know it by the end of that week. I had the pieces. I had Yvonne's words. I had the cold feeling in my stomach. But I hadn't put the whole picture together. I didn't yet know about Derek. I didn't yet know about the debt. I didn't yet know that my daughter and the man she was with had been planning this for almost a year. That knowledge was still coming for me, and when it arrived, it would not arrive gently. Here's where I need to check in with you because I know this part is heavy. If you have ever realized that someone you loved was not just hurting you, but using you, and that the thing you thought was a relationship was actually a transaction, drop a fire emoji in the comments. I see you. I see you, and I know exactly how much it costs to keep standing after that kind of revelation. But I wasn't going to let her have it. Not my grandson, not my home, not the life I'd built with my own 2 hands while she was out there making choices she refused to own. I was going to fight, and I was going to win. Not by yelling louder, but by knowing more. And by the time the next court date arrived, I would know everything. Yvonne sent me the full file 3 days later. Not the official one, the one she'd kept for herself. The one with the notes in the margins and the interview transcripts that hadn't made it into the report, and the names of people she'd talked to who hadn't wanted to go on record. She sent it to my personal email, encrypted, with a subject line that said only, "For your eyes." I opened it at my kitchen table after Leo was asleep. I read it straight through. It took me 4 hours. And by the time I was done, I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't even angry. I was something else. Something colder. Something quieter. The thing you become when you finally understand that the person you raised is not the person standing in front of you. The file painted a picture Emma had never wanted me to see. She had moved to Nevada with a man named Derek, not the other way around. She'd met him online, in a forum for real estate investing. Not real estate investing, real estate schemes. The kind where you convince someone with assets to sign things they don't fully understand. Derek had done 18 months in county for fraud in 2019. Emma knew. She didn't care. She'd told a friend, a woman named Keziah, who later gave a statement to Yvonne, that Derek was the first man who ever had a real plan. The plan, as far as Yvonne could piece together from interviews and text messages and a partial email chain Keziah had forwarded, was this. Emma would return to my city, petition for custody of Leo, argue that I was emotionally unstable and had alienated her from her own child, and secure legal guardianship. Once she had Leo, she'd petition the court for possession of the family home, my home, on the grounds that Leo's stability required staying in the environment he knew. Then Derek would move in. Then they'd take out a second mortgage. Then they'd sell. And I would be whatever version of grandma was still allowed supervised visits once a month. They'd been working on it for 11 months. I read that timeline twice. 11 months. That meant Emma was pregnant with Mateo, carrying a child she would eventually abandon, while she and Derek were already planning how to take my house and my grandson. Leo wasn't even 3 yet. She'd been gone for most of his life. And she'd spent that time not missing him, not trying to get clean or get stable or get back to him, but constructing a legal argument designed to make me look like the villain in a story where I was the only one who had ever shown up. There's a particular kind of grief that comes with realizing you were not betrayed in a moment of weakness. You were betrayed methodically, systematically, over time, by someone who looked you in the eyes across a dinner table while holding a spreadsheet of your vulnerabilities. I had made Emma her favorite meal, chicken pot pie, the last time she visited. She'd sat at this very table. She'd asked me how the mortgage payments were going. She'd asked if I'd ever thought about selling. I'd told her the truth. I'd said I was almost paid off. I'd said the house was worth 3 times what I bought it for. I'd said it was Leo's inheritance. And she'd smiled. She'd smiled and said, "That's so smart, Mom." She wasn't agreeing with me. She was taking notes. I closed the file at 2 a.m. The house was silent except for the soft hum of Leo's nightlight through the baby monitor. I sat there in the dark kitchen for a long time. Not crying, not shaking, just breathing. Just letting the pieces settle into the shape they had always been trying to form. And then I did something I hadn't done in 3 decades. I called my sister. My sister Vivian. We hadn't spoken in 6 years. Not since the fight about our mother's estate, a fight that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the fact that Vivian had told me, in the hallway outside our mother's hospital room, that I had a pathological need to be the hero. She wasn't wrong, honestly. But at the time, it had shattered something between us. We'd exchanged Christmas cards and nothing else. 2 women who used to share a bedroom, reduced to Hallmark sentiments and signed first names. But I called her, because Vivian was a forensic accountant. And if there was anyone in the world who could help me trace what Emma and Derek had been doing with money I didn't know they had, it was my estranged sister. She answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was groggy, confused. I said, "Viv, it's me. I need your help." There was a long silence, and then she said, "Tell me everything." And I did. I told her about Leo, about Emma, about the courtroom, about Mateo, the grandchild she didn't know she had either, about Derek and the house and the 11 months of planning. And when I was done, when I was empty, Vivian said something I will never forget. "I've been waiting 20 years for you to stop protecting her." I didn't have words. I just sat there on the phone with my sister, listening to her breathe 3 states away. And I realized how much I had lost by trying to hold Emma up. I hadn't just lost sleep or savings or peace of mind. I had lost Vivian. I had lost the person who knew me before I was anyone's mother. I had lost 6 years of phone calls and visits and the sound of her laugh because I was so busy managing Emma's chaos that I had no room left for anyone else. Vivian got to work the next morning. She had access to databases I didn't understand. She found things in 4 days that Yvonne had been chasing for months. Derek wasn't just a small-time fraudster. He had open warrants in 2 counties. He had a string of aliases. And this was the part that made Celeste actually put down her pen when I told her. He had taken out 3 credit cards in Emma's name. Not with her permission, without it. He'd maxed all 3. $47,000. And Emma didn't know. That was the second bomb, the one I hadn't seen coming, the one that changed everything. Because now I wasn't just fighting to keep Leo. I was holding information that could protect my daughter from a man who was bleeding her dry, even as she was trying to bleed me. And I had to decide what to do with it. The decision shouldn't have been hard. That's what I told myself in the days after Vivian's discovery. Emma was trying to take my home. She was trying to take Leo. She had lied about me in open court, painted me as a monster, and spent nearly a year conspiring with a man whose only skill was extracting money from people who trusted him. By every logical measure, I owed her nothing. I could sit back. I could let the court find out about Derek on its own. I could let the credit card debt bury her. I could let her learn, finally, what happens when you hand your life over to someone who sees you as a transaction. But I couldn't. And I couldn't because of something I haven't told you yet. When Emma was 9 years old, she was diagnosed with a heart murmur. Nothing life-threatening, a minor valve irregularity that required monitoring once a year and no contact sports. But for 3 weeks between the initial screening and the specialist appointment, I didn't know it was minor. I spent those 3 weeks sitting up at night, listening to her breathe through the baby monitor I'd plugged back in, convinced that any moment her heart might simply stop. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I functioned on adrenaline and terror and the absolute certainty that if something happened to her, I would not survive it. That feeling doesn't go away. That's the thing nobody tells you about being a mother. The terror of those 3 weeks never left my body. It's still there, in my cells, in my bones, in the part of my brain that wakes up at 2 in the morning when the house is too quiet. You can be furious at your child. You can be betrayed by your child. You can sit in a courtroom and listen to your child call you a danger. And still, the part of you that sat up listening for her heartbeat will not let you watch her walk into a fire. So I made a choice. Not for Emma the adult, for Emma the 9-year-old with the heart murmur, for the girl I'd taught to ride a bike, for the daughter who, somewhere underneath all the lies and the schemes and the desperate hunger for a man's approval, was about to be financially destroyed by the very person she thought was her partner. I had Celeste draft a letter, not a court filing, not a motion, a letter, to Emma's attorney. It contained 3 things. 1. The Nevada Department of Family Services report on Mateo, establishing a documented pattern of abandonment. 2. Vivian's financial findings on Derek, including the 3 credit cards, the open warrants, and the $47,000 in debt Emma didn't know about. And 3. An offer. The offer was simple. Emma drops the custody petition. She signs a consent order giving me permanent legal guardianship of Leo, with visitation rights for her. Supervised, at my discretion, no overnights until she completes 6 months of counseling and stable housing. She moves back to our city. She lets me help her untangle the mess Derek made of her finances. She files a police report against him for the identity theft. And in exchange, I never submit any of what I know to the court. The Nevada records stay sealed from this proceeding. The financial fraud stays between us. Her legal record stays clean. I'm not going to pretend this was purely altruistic. It wasn't. The offer protected Leo, gave me the legal security I needed to raise him without looking over my shoulder for the next 15 years. It protected my home. No court would give Emma possession now, not with what I had. But it also protected her. Because if the Nevada file went before the judge, and the judge ruled her an unfit parent for Leo, that ruling could be used in Clark County to terminate her rights to Mateo permanently. She would lose both her children, forever. And I couldn't do that. I couldn't be the person who made that happen. Not to anyone, not even to the woman who was trying to take everything I had. Celeste sent the letter on a Friday. The next court date was the following Wednesday. And for 4 days, I heard nothing. Not a word. Not from Emma's attorney, not from Emma. Leo and I went to the park. We made pancakes. He learned to say Stegosaurus, and I pretended I wasn't counting the hours until my entire future would be decided by a daughter who hadn't spoken to me directly in 3 months. Here's a question for you, and I mean it. Have you ever had to save someone who was actively trying to destroy you? Not because they deserved it, but because you couldn't live with the person you'd become if you didn't. Team save her anyway, or team let her fall? Drop it in the comments. I want to know where you stand. Because I stood in both places, and neither one felt like victory. Tuesday night, the night before the hearing, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. It was Emma. Her voice was hoarse. She'd been crying. She said, "Mom." Just that. Just, "Mom." And then she said something I had never heard her say in her entire adult life. She said, "I think I need help." We talked for 2 hours. The first real conversation we'd had since before she left for Nevada. She told me about Derek, how he'd convinced her the house should have been hers, how he'd said I was controlling, how he'd made her believe she was building a future for Leo when she was really building a theft. She told me she'd been afraid of him for months but didn't know how to leave. She told me she'd left Mateo because Derek said he'd watch the baby and then disappeared for 3 days. And when she came back, the neighbors had already called the police. She was a victim of him. Not entirely. She'd made her own choices, and some of them were terrible, and she owned that on the phone that night. But partially. Enough. Enough that the clean, simple narrative I'd built, my daughter the villain, me the wronged mother, suddenly had cracks in it. We didn't fix everything that night. We still haven't fixed everything. Some things take years. Some things take a lifetime. But she agreed to the deal. She agreed to let Leo stay with me. She agreed to come home. And for the first time since this nightmare started, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over. The morning of the hearing, I woke up at 5. Not because I had to, the court wasn't until 10, but because my body had been keeping its own schedule for months now, and it didn't trust calm. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the light come up over the fence, the same fence Leo had learned to climb last summer, the one I'd had to reinforce because he kept going over it to chase the neighbor's cat. This house. This impossibly ordinary house. It had held me through a divorce and a daughter's adolescence and 3 years of toddler chaos. And someone had tried to take it. Someone had tried to make me a stranger in my own kitchen, but that wasn't what I was thinking about as I stood there. I was thinking about the phone call. The sound of Emma's voice saying, "I think I need help." 6 words I'd been waiting to hear since she was 18 and running from something she couldn't name. Celeste met me outside the courthouse at 9:15. She was holding a manila envelope, the letter we'd sent, plus Emma's signed consent order, which had arrived by email at 11 o'clock the night before. Emma had signed it. She'd agreed to everything. Guardianship to me, supervised visitation, counseling, a financial plan, a police report against Derek. She'd signed her name at the bottom of a document that gave me her son, not because a judge ordered it, but because she'd finally looked at the truth and stopped running. The judge called the case at 10:07. Her name was Judge Adeline Cruz, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and the kind of face that had seen every version of human failing and still showed up to work. She looked at the consent order. She looked at Emma's attorney, Bradley, who looked significantly less smug than he had at the first hearing. She looked at Emma. And then she did something I didn't expect. She asked Emma to stand. "Ms. Keegan," she said. Emma had taken my last name back after Derek, a detail I hadn't noticed until that moment. "I've read the consent order. I understand you're agreeing to transfer permanent guardianship to your mother. Is that correct?" Emma's voice cracked when she answered. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Cruz set the papers down. "I've also read the Nevada report." My stomach dropped. Celeste's head turned sharply toward me. The report wasn't supposed to be in the file. We hadn't submitted it. But Judge Cruz had found it anyway. A judge with decades on the bench and access to every database in the system. She'd found Mateo. "I'm not here to punish you, Ms. Keegan," the judge said, and her voice was gentler than I'd ever heard a judge sound. "I think you've been punished enough. By circumstances, by choices, by people who took advantage of you." She looked at Emma for a long moment. "But I need you to understand something. What your mother did, offering you this deal instead of burying you with what she had, that is not the act of a controlling woman. That is not the act of a toxic parent. That is the act of a mother who loves you enough to save you from yourself. Do you understand that?" Emma was crying, not the performative kind, the ugly kind, the kind where your shoulders shake and you can't catch your breath. She nodded. She said, "Yes." She said, "I know." And then she turned and looked at me, really looked at me, not through me, not past me, and she said, "I'm sorry, Mom." I'd waited years for that apology. I'd imagined it 100 different ways. In none of those versions was I sitting in a courtroom while a judge told my daughter she'd been saved. In none of those versions did the apology hurt. But it did hurt. It hurt because I could see, finally, how much damage had been done to her. Not by me, by Derek, by her own choices, by a world that had told her a man's approval was worth more than her own judgment. I'd been so busy protecting Leo from her that I hadn't let myself see how badly she needed protecting too. Judge Cruz signed the order at 10:23. Guardianship to me. Leo was mine. Legally, finally, permanently. The house was safe. The nightmare was over. I should have felt triumphant, and I did a little, but mostly I felt tired. The kind of tired that comes after you've been holding your breath for 11 months and someone finally tells you it's okay to exhale. Emma came home that afternoon. Not to stay. She had a lot of work to do and she needed to do it on her own. She rented a small apartment across town, walking distance from the community college where she enrolled 3 weeks later. She filed the police report against Derek. She started counseling. She saw Leo every Sunday, supervised at first, and then, slowly, carefully, on her own. She's still rebuilding. Some bridges take longer than others. But she's there. She's trying. And Leo has a mother now. Not just me, her too. In whatever way she's able to be. Mateo is still in Nevada. Emma's rights to him are still pending. The case there is separate and it's complicated. And some endings don't arrive neatly in a single courtroom on a Wednesday morning. But Yvonne calls me every few weeks with updates. The foster family is good. He's loved. He's safe. And Emma is fighting for him now too. For real this time. Not for a house. Not for a scheme. For him. You are never too sensitive. The room was just never safe enough. That's the thing I learned through all of this. I had spent so many years being told I was too much, too controlling, too protective, too invested, too present, when the truth was that I was never the problem. I was just the only one willing to be the grown-up in a room full of people who wanted to stay children. If this story feels familiar to you, if you have ever been the one who stayed, the one who showed up, the one who got called controlling for wanting basic accountability, I need you to hear this. You are not too much. They were just not enough. And around here, we don't just survive it. We understand it. And then, we let it go. The firelight is always on. I'll see you next time.